A lot happened in 2025. We had big political swings, stubborn inflation, new tax rules, and even an historic government shutdown. But what actually matters for your financial life? Today, we're going to break down 2025's 5 biggest headlines and what they may mean for your plan moving forward.
It's easy to get lost on the way to retirement. Things like taxes, improper planning, and excessive market risk can all lead you astray from your goal of a successful and happy retirement. That's where Liz Whittaberry comes in. She's a holistic financial advisor and the founder of Best Path Advisors, and she can help guide you to a better financial path. This is Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry.
Welcome in once again to Retire on Your Best Path with Liz Whittaberry and myself here to talk investing, finance, retirement, and the year-end review. Year-end or year-end review? I don't know which one it is, Liz, but either way, we're going to have a conversation.
End of year,
yeah. How are you?
I am good. We were just talking about how cold it is and that Christmas is next week.
I know.
As we're recording this.
Where did that happen at? I know. It's crazy, right?
It's hard to believe.
So, and it'll be New Year's, and hopefully this cold weather that you and I are experiencing in this area will go away. The other folks are used to it, but we're not used to it. We don't like it.
I'm not used to it, no.
Well, we certainly had a big year, interesting year. I think as they all seem to be anymore. It just seems to kind of be that way. I don't know. At the time we're having a conversation, the time we're taping this, our last episode of the year, the market's off to a little bit of a little chop this morning. But, just for the purpose of the conversation, Liz, year to date at the time we're taping this, which is, to your point, about a week before Christmas, 16.1% for the year. So it's a pretty good year overall as far as the market is concerned.
It is. And I said early in the year that I expected that we would be up for this year.
Well, then you would have been right. And we'll roll it back to April to kind of start our conversation, because in April, nobody thought that, right? So Liberation Day, tariffs are rolling out, and, the sky is falling. We had a pretty, the market didn't like that for a little while, but a very short while. It didn't last very long.
Yeah, that's interesting, the way that does happen when we have those big events. It can be very short-lived. But on the whole tariff thing, it's still volatile. We have talks of bigger tariffs, littler tariffs. The White House has a plan B if they're ruled illegal. So it still is not come to a closure. It still is impacting the market a bit, and the supply chains and the cost of everything that we have as that works through the whole system. It takes a while for that to happen, which I think is hard to understand, how long it takes for higher cost of goods to continue to work through the system.
Well, it's interesting, too, because if you think about how, as it kind of rolled out, and again, we're talking about, as the year, as it kind of played out, they started doing this stuff. The market immediately shot down. It was kind of like COVID's response. It was kind of a V, right? It kind of rebounded pretty quickly, maybe, 60 days or so, it kind of came back. But industry does what industry does. And when they started talking about pausing some of the different tariffs on different countries, well, companies front loaded and got all of their supplies in. So they kind of kept the prices, I think, in better check than I think people were thinking it was going to be. It still feels like we're still dealing with inflation, yes, but I think it could have been worse. And to that point, I think that's when we started seeing the Fed chair and the White House really going back and forth about, the interest rate cuts, right, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. But because of that, I do think that they talked about, and we did feel kind of a lingering inflation throughout the spring and summer.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue into the first part of next year. So we just have to stay prepared for the possibility of higher prices and continuing to take a while to work through the whole system. When companies are planning for, say, all the stuff that's happening now, Christmas, they started planning that way back at the beginning of the year.
Right.
Before we had the tariffs. They were already putting their plans in place for this time of year. And so I think that we will have some impact that still flows through.
Okay.
But it's a really good time when things like this happen to just go back and reassess, what are the things I'm paying for? What am I getting for that? And are there any things that, really aren't serving me and are not a good use of my money that I should just really cut out?
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Liz, because I talk with advisors all across the country on various different shows, and a lot of them were saying their clients were more concerned or more curious as to how inflation was impacting their retirement over the course of the last year or even into the next year versus the market volatility. I think they've gotten a lot more savvy with the market volatility, especially if you've got a good plan in place. Like if you're working with someone like yourself and you've got a strategy, the market volatility doesn't kind of bother you as much as maybe folks who don't have a strategy. But the inflation conversation did seem to persist.
Yes, and that is something that people need to focus on more than the market volatility.
Okay.
We should all be more concerned about inflation than market volatility. And the reason for that is market volatility is up and down, but the market then continues to basically go up over time.
Right.
So we have these short-term, adjustments that we expect,
Right.
but when you look historically, the market is averaging very nice long-term rates of return and outpacing inflation by, 7 or 8%.
Okay.
Is some of the recent research that I was just reading. And so that market volatility is a short-term thing. It's in the moment. Whereas inflation is more persistent. When we have prices go up like they have, then they don't come back down just because inflation is lower next year.
Mm-hmm.
The prices are now where they are now higher, where they're at. And then the future inflation stacks on top of that. And so that does become something that has a bigger impact long term on your retirement plan, because we have really high inflation early in retirement. Then even if we have lower inflation, it's from a higher starting point as far as all the prices. And so that means all of the future cash flow is higher. It's a little bit similar to that dollar cost averaging problem that we talk about all the time. And the what returns are you going to get at different points in time? If inflation is higher at the beginning of retirement versus the end of retirement, well, then you're going to have a completely different set of cash flow needs over your retirement years.
Gotcha.
And so I do think that is important for people to focus on and think about, and make sure that you're looking at your plan, what you're spending money on, what is the cost of that, the things that are really important, rerun that to make sure that you're still on track. And then if you need to make any tweaks, you can do that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that makes sense, right? I mean, and I think we need to have that strategy in place. Now, again, we're talking about the year through review. So we kind of started with April, right? We talked about the kind of persistent inflation throughout the spring and into summer and really all continuing on. But with that kind of back and forth of, as I mentioned earlier, the Fed not touching the rates throughout the year, the White House wanted them to. So high yield savings accounts, they kind of stayed strong throughout the year.
They did. Yeah. And that is a good thing for all of us when we can have a nice rate of return on that short-term money. That's great. Remember when we were getting 0.01 maybe on, savings accounts. So that's great. It is important though to keep in mind, how much should you really have in that bucket of money and not end up with too much just because it seems like it's a nice rate of return. If it's not outpacing inflation significantly, then you're not going to be on track for the long term. So you want to get the right amount in that short-term bucket, use those high yield savings accounts for the right amount of money, maybe emergency funds, have 6 to 12 months, have your short-term bucket, a year or two of income, and then put the rest of it at work earning more for the long term. Because even if the earnings don't seem like a lot in one year, over time, the compounding of that does become a significant difference.
Yeah, and so I think we can take advantage while those happen, and even as we moved in later into the year, Liz, we saw some of the rates ticking down. As a matter of fact, at the time we're taking this, I think they just cut them last week, right at the end of the week.
Yeah, and they have come down. And I help people with tax planning, and so we're looking at how much interest and did you get this year compared to last year? Because we're trying to project out how much room do we have in our brackets for doing raw conversions, things like that. And, I'm seeing a pretty significant decline. They still got decent interest as compared to maybe 5 years ago, but not nearly as nice as last year.
Yeah, they're ticking down for sure. Yeah. So bearing that in mind, right? So keep that in mind as we're moving forward. Those rates are probably short-lived, and we'll see how that plays out into next year. So then we move into fully into summer, and of course we got the OBBA, right? I love saying that. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in July, and obviously this was kind of the big story financially of the year in many ways, right? And of course the big piece was that at least our tax rates didn't go up.
Yeah, and that is very nice. It's a big deal in my mind. And as you know, I specialize in multi-year tax planning with my clients. It's one of the main things that I help people with. How can we reduce your lifetime tax bill?
Right.
And, in fact, this year I just completed the tax planning certified professional designation through the American College to continue, just honing the information that I have to help people in this area. And over the past, 5-7 years, we've been focused on making as much progress as possible before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expired at the end of this year, because that's what we were expecting.
Right.
And now that the One Big Beautiful Bill has eliminated that problem, then that's good news, because we now can continue working on that plan, which we were going to do anyways, but it's going to cost us less because we're going to still have these lower tax rates that we had in place under Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it's good news, and it means continue to do what you can. You have more years of opportunity. How many, we don't know, because even though it's a permanent tax bill, that only means it's permanent until a different
Congress and
a different Congress.
Yeah. And let's be honest, as much
change.
acrimony as there is between the two sides, if the other side gets in on the next election, they're going to try to undo as much as possible. Just like we've seen the last couple of administrations go back and forth. It's like children in the schoolyard. So so probably prepare for that, right? And be efficient, because some of those things that were in there, Liz, to your point, I mean, they are short-lived. So
right.
Take advantage of that multi-year stuff, some of those special provisions and things like that. You're probably only looking through 28, 29, right? 2028 to 29 before that could change. So
yeah. So, with the ability to now deduct more for your property tax, or some of these things allow us to have even more room and make use of doubling up on itemized deductions in 1 year, doing some things like that really make a difference in moving the needle for the lifetime taxes, even though maybe it seems like it's not a lot of difference in this particular year.
Sure. Well, that standard deduction is so high, right? I mean, think about, especially if you're a senior, if you're in that bracket and you do make it within the financial caveats, right? I mean, you're talking like almost like 45,000 in standard deduction. So, take advantage. Talk with financial professionals. Make sure you're being effective there.
Right.
Yeah, it's big numbers.
A lot of things that you can look at.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, then, as we move through the year, Liz, to not be outdone, we had the record-breaking 43-day shutdown. Now, this one is interesting because people feel kind of back and forth about it. Yes, it's frustrating, but we're also like, oh, they're doing that thing again. Because they do this like every couple of years, or now it seems like once a year, or even every 7-8 months. But the interesting thing to me was, if you're not a federal employee, now obviously federal employees were obviously more impacted. But the interesting thing to me was twofold, and I'll ask you these two questions here. One, the market seems to have gotten to where it doesn't care at all, because we set all new record highs during the shutdown, right, on the S&P and the Dow, right? Hit all new time highs. And so the market's kind of like, whatever, we don't care. It's kind of funny. But I
remember way back, the first time we had the big shutdown, how nerve-wracking that felt. And now it's like, we survived it before. We're going to survive it again. We just have to wait.
Well, it's a poker chip. We know they're going to come to the table at some point, right?
Yeah, they have to for their own job.
Right. I mean, of course, they get paid, but I mean, eventually it's one of those things where, and yes, there are, and again, I'm not trying to make light of it, because a lot of people do suffer from, during these things. And that was going to be my second point. I think a lot of new retirees, my mom lives in a senior building. We talk about it quite often, Liz, there on the show. And she had a few people, come by and talk to her because they know that I talk with financial advisors all the time. And they're like, do we still get Social Security? So I think there's a little concern especially if you're a new retiree, you wonder, did those payments still happen? Of course they do, but a lot of little things like that just make it nerve-wracking. So how big of a deal are these? Because they happen so often. if you're a retiree.
I feel like it is still nerve-wracking. Like, it's not as nerve-wracking as it was
Right.
the first time it happened, but it is still nerve-wracking because it's our government.
Mm-hmm.
And they're supposed to be able to work together and do the best for the country and all of that. And I think that we all feel that when they can't come to some kind of agreement. We certainly do feel that on an emotional level quite strongly because,
Yeah.
we should be working. But I think on the other side of it, just being prepared for not just a government shutdown, but anything that could happen that could disrupt your plans.
Yeah, it feels like another emergency example, right? Kind of like
Right.
COVID and some other stuff. Do you have some funds set aside for odd things that come up like
Right.
this?
Do you have the ability to access that money at any time from any location? And you really do
Good point.
need to think about that because we never know the things that might happen. We also need to have an emergency plan for just how we care for ourselves if maybe the electricity grid goes down or things that could happen that, I pray never do happen to any of us, but they could happen. And,
Right.
just beginning to put in place what is that plan? If in the worst case, how would I care for myself? Where would I go? Where would I be? How would I have food and stay warm? Which, we're very aware of right now as it's so cold.
And the whole country's
I would
actually
hate to have
pretty
no
cold, too,
electricity right
yeah,
now.
exactly. Well, you guys dealt with that a few years ago with that big ice storm, right? So
We did,
Yeah.
and I do now have a electric generator
There you
that
go.
would run enough stuff,
There you go.
and I didn't at the time.
See, yeah, prepared, right?
So now I'm more prepared than I was, but it is an important thing to think about.
Yeah.
That we just have a plan, then we know that whatever comes up, we can deal with it, and that I think would give all of us, as we do that, we have more clarity, we have more peace of mind because we're ready.
Well, and honorable mention, or maybe not so honorable mention, to other things without the year. We talked a little bit about the slow rate cuts from the Fed. We'll see how 2026 kind of responds to some of that. What's the housing market doing, right? It seems like it kind of froze a little bit. Now it seems to be kind of a slow thaw. The AI driven, whatever you want to call to the market. A lot of the market is obviously AI driven, right?
Right.
A lot of the tech stuff. So it's going to be, I guess at the end of the day, Liz, 2025 had a lot of noise. 2026 is probably going to have equal amount, right? The headlines might be different, but the drama is probably there.
I think as we head into 2026 that some things to watch. We've got really high PE ratios, the price to earnings ratios, and that's going to point to lower growth, maybe not in the near term, but we need to be aware of that and how that's playing out in the market. I think that real estate could be starting to see a bit of a comeback, so that would be interesting to watch. AI is definitely driving change, like you say, but there's going to be winners and losers, and there's a little bit of a big spending war going on right now.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll
And
have
look
to
at how
see.
many people are being laid off from companies you wouldn't expect it, not because of
Right.
the economy in this per se, but because of AI replacing jobs, right?
Yeah.
So interesting stuff.
And Fed Chair Jerome Powell's term is going to end in 2026. We don't quite know who's going to be replacing him yet. And the Fed policy for 2026 is not clear, partly because of that, because we're going to have a change in who is heading the Fed. But the Fed is so key to so many things that happen in the economy, because when they set rates, it flows through to everything else. What banks do, what you can get a loan at, it just flows through the whole economy. So those are some things to keep an eye on. I would say that if you've got a plan and you've got your investments aligned with your short-term and your long-term needs, like we've talked about in the past, then you shouldn't have to make any big adjustments in response to big headlines. You can make small adjustments to benefit from whatever's going on in the economic cycle, but overall, stick to your plan.
Yeah. And control what you can control.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you've got to have a good plan.
Yeah. Because people will often say, what can I do? Well, control the controllable, right? Your savings habits, your plan, your long-term strategy, your tax efficiency, your multi-year tax thing that Liz talked about, right? So that's the things that we can control, because the rest of the stuff, Liz, we just can't do, right? We can't. We don't have any real say over that stuff. And that's how we can get ourselves on to a confident retirement path.
That's right. If you've got a good plan and you're sticking with it and ignoring the noise, then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to be happy with where you've ended up. You're going to be on your best path in retirement.
Well, as always, we thank you so much for listening to us and checking the podcast out throughout the year. Hopefully you're checking out Liz's YouTube channel as well. A lot of great content on that. So as we wrap up the calendar year of 2025, we'll be back with new episodes in 26. Make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast or subscribed to it if you haven't already. BestPathAdvisors.com is where you can find Liz and all that information on the good stuff there. You can check that out. Subscribe to the audio version of the podcast here with us. And of course, on the YouTube channel as well. She's got a lot of great videos she puts up there. So go check out that for additional education and information. And of course, if you need some help with how things are affecting you, or if you're worried about how they might be affecting you, that's why you get a strategy in place. Of course, Liz is the financial advisor and founder at Best Path Advisors. And you can again find her online at bestpathadvisors.com. Liz, have yourself a great Christmas and a holiday, and I will see you in the new year.
You too. We want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
And we'll see you next time here on Retire on Your Best Path.
The preceding program is sponsored by Best Path Advisors, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through J.W. Cole Advisors. Best Path Advisors, J.W. Cole Financial, and J.W. Cole Advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Liz Whitberry should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Neither J.W. Cole Financial nor its representatives provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. Persons who provide such advice do so in a capacity other than as a registered representative of J.W. Cole. Investing is subject to risks, including the loss of principal. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable, however, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed.